Hi there, everybody. Cool. Thanks very much for coming down to our talk. My name's Tom. I've got Ross here. Thanks for coming to investigate how we're attacking and breaking into networks using Kerberos, but also, more importantly, like how to detect and stop these things happening. Ultimately, we are here to make the organizations we're testing better. So if we don't actually provide any remediation advice, then we're not actually delivering much value. Just very quickly, how many people are from like the blue side of things? Yeah, nice one. Someone's got to be. And the red? Yeah, God's chosen trade. Happy days. Is there any like policy guys or, you know, like audit types and stuff? Just that one dude at the back. Nice one. Thanks for... Someone's got to do it. That's cool. Anyway, so let's get cracking. This is me up here. I work at Netitude doing red teaming and large-scale infrastructure, complicated infrastructures. My thing that I enjoy doing is abusing like systems administration tools against their organizations. I used to be a sysadmin until I sort of reformed myself and now got into pen testing and security. Did some time in the army, did some cyber-related stuffs, and now got some cert.
Cool. And hey everyone, my name's Ross, at Pondexter on Twitter, for those of you who care, and also the world's smallest red teamer, for obvious reasons. Bulk of my time is spent on the red team side of things, doing engagements as an operator, fighting with EDR, fighting with blue teams, and then ultimately reporting. Also, because of our engagements are threat intelligence led, I've been working more with cyber threat intelligence recently, and in particular, well not in particular, it's not really CTI, but exploring the blue team side of things, so looking at detection and threat hunting with tools like Splunk, Sysmon, Carbon Black, etc. Various certs listed there, and prior to swapping over to the red team side of things, I was a pen tester, bug hunter for 5 years.
Okay, excellent. Let's talk about what we're going to actually cover. I think it's quite important we get a bit of context around what we're covering. Otherwise, all the knowledge just kind of sits in isolation, doesn't really glue together at all. More importantly, I'll run you through Kerberos. I know it's a super complicated topic. At the level we need now, it's not going to be that complicated. Don't overcomplicate it. There's no algorithms flying around or anything like that. Don't worry about it. So we'll do a TLDR level, then we'll do a TLDR on Splunk, and then we'll get into the good stuff, into the 3 different attacks. And we'll break that into attack, detect, and evade. Because ultimately, we still want red to win a little bit, so we've got some evasion stuff in there as well. We'll give a quick sort of run through on how you can do threat hunting, like quite easily with free tooling. We're using Splunk throughout this, which isn't free, but you could use any tool whatsoever, you know, whether it's Helk, or if you're using Logarithm or something similar. And more importantly, we'll give some key takeaways that you can implement either on the red side, on the reporting things. On the blue side, you can pressure your bosses to allow you to make some changes. Because if you're struggling with prioritization, do these things first before you start like getting into anything else.
Cool. So the talk, what and why, just really to kind of follow on from what Max says, is basically we want to demonstrate like there's more to Kerberos than just like invoke Kerberos, go wild. So we want to understand like what our footprint is as a red team when we do these sorts of attacks, and then on the blue team side of things, how we can leverage that footprint to build out detections, perform threat hunts off the back of these detections, and things like that, and kind of just ultimately like improve both the red team and blue team understanding of Kerberos as a whole. As kind of Mac mentioned, you can do this with Splunk, which is what we're using, but there is loads of free alternatives, also paid alternatives as well, that you can do this with. There's a thing called Unencoder that allows you to like convert Splunk rules to different query languages and stuff. So plenty of options there.
Okay, so this is the TLDR of Splunk, and this is from Sean Metcalf at AD Security. If you're not familiar with AD Security and you're doing pen testing, internal imps, or red teams, basically read the entirety of that, going back as far as you can. So Kerberos is split into a 6-way handshake process. Think of it as similar to the 3-way handshake from the TCP side of things. And if we center it around this part here, first you need to prove who you are, and you prove that to the, in this case, Windows Network, the domain controller. Then you prove that you're permitted to access the resource you want to access, whether that's HTTP, MS SQL, or whatever that service happens to be. And thirdly, you apply that authenticated access into the application that you want. Yeah. So there you go. You now know as much about Kerberos as I do. Welcome to the party. It's fun being a Kerberos expert.
Cool. So just quick Splunk 101. This is mainly around like terminology I'm going to use in the talk. So the server is what you would expect it to be. It's a Splunk server that's going to consume all your logs and data. The forwarder is what you deploy out onto your endpoints, and what they're going to do is log collection and forward to the server. The indexer, indexes, is like basically what is one of the things that runs on the server side that then handles all that data coming in and organizes it. Source types is something we're going to use in the queries. So when you're, searching for an event and you want to refine that, think of it as like hunting for a needle in a haystack, right? You want to make that haystack as small as possible before you go looking for that needle. Just because from like a CPU optimization perspective, that's like optimal, and at scale that matters. And then the search queries are basically what we're going to be using to make searches. So just a quick run through our Splunk setup. Independent enterprise server installed on Ubuntu, all in a ESXi lab. Forwarders onto the endpoints with the latest version of Sysmon. Sysmon is free and gives amazing visibility into endpoints and servers, things like that. So it's definitely something you should consider for your environment if you haven't already. We're using Sysmon with Swift on Security's Sysmon config. That just allows us to get additional insight on top of what it does out of the box. And then finally, Splunk supports a number of plugins, so we've got the Sysmon plugin there. There is also a deploy plugin where you can push out Sysmon configs and things like that through your Splunk server to save you doing it in every endpoint. And this is just a quick network diagram. So it's basically TLDR of the network. We get proxy out to the internet, 2016 domain controller, 2010 workstation fleet, our Splunk server, that's all the logs are going to. We've also got a forest trust to a domain called Blurbank, which has got a mix of boxes, generally up to date with Windows Defender, AMSI Carbon Black. We've also got Sentinel-1 deployed on this fleet, and then we'll get fully configured AD. One thing to note though is, and this is important later for threat hunting, some of these workstations can actually get direct to the internet, so we're going to talk about how we can look for that as well from this configuration standpoint.
Okay, let's get into the good stuff, like the attacking side of things. Let's start off with the Kerberos. Okay, without getting massively into the weeds here, what we're doing here is all done from a low privilege domain user context in Blurbank. Here we've got deb. So we've got a shell that we would have in exactly the same context as we got from a single fish. And that's fine. We don't need any enhanced privileges here. We're using a PS implant which uses system management automation.dll to use PowerShell functions without running PowerShell.exe. Yeah, running PowerShell.exe on the endpoints on the red teaming side is a little bit APT memes, so we don't need to be doing that now. What we're doing here is we're requesting a TGS for all of the services inside that organization, and then we'll then copy those off into a hashcat, whether that's in a GPU cracking or similar. Okay, in terms of like preventing and detecting these things when it happens, yeah, because pretty much every internal pen tester will probably do this as soon as they sort of early on in the engagement. On the red team side of life, we usually make use of it at times, and we'll touch on how we do the evasion side of life in a moment. So we often see that MS SQL is the biggest offender. When a company is starting up, you know, they buy SQL, and then they sort of grow over 5 or 10 years, and they're still using the same SQL instance, yeah? We often find shared credentials across multiple instances, and people are terrified of changing it, because in large organizations, they've got monstrous technical debt, and a fear of changing things and breaking things. So all this little one-liner here from Power Up SQL, that's from Scott Sutherland. I think he works for NetSpy in the US. So we've got get SQL instance main, which will go across, grab all of the instances of SQL, and then pipe it across into a nice list. And you'll end up with 2 columns. You know, a list of usernames down the left, and then on the right-hand side, a number of times that username was used across the environment. What we're looking for is a nice long list of usernames, and then in the number of times used across the environment column, we're looking for ones only. You know, if you're not seeing ones, you're obviously reusing the same set of Active Directory credentials, or the same usernames at least, across different services. Additionally, I'm a big fan, I'm going to touch on this a little bit more. Honey spins take sort of maybe 7 to 8 seconds to implement in the largest environments in the world. Yeah, so there's no excuse not to be doing those. All the code to do those, there's 4 different ways of deploying them, all eminently doable by even the worst systems administrators. Yeah, we can just do honey spins and try and take the initiative back towards the blue side a little bit. And again, we're just in terms of preventing the use of the Kerberos attack being used against your environments. Service accounts very, very, very rarely need type 2 interactive logons granted across the domain. Very frequently they need type 3 and 4, which is batch and network. But type 2 interactive logins, which is exactly the same context you have when you log into your machine, very rare that SQL services or any HTTP services require those permissions.
So what does this look like from the detection side? Just kind of going to run through a quick query structure here. So first of all, we're indexing to main, which I want to say right now is something you should absolutely never do. That is a CV generating event, and you'll be looking for a job pretty quickly if you do that. Generally, you want to split your indexes out. So like if we're ingesting win event log data, we want a win event log index. If we're taking in sysmon data, we want a sysmon index. And then we're going to sort by source types. So we're looking for win event logs, and then anything that's happened in the last 25 hours. And we're looking for 4769, which is a TGS has been requested And that's kind of like what we get back here. We've got 250 events in the last 25 hours. That might be normal for an enterprise environment, maybe not. And then, so we can see here as well is this is telemetry. So we can see it's pretty low, but it peaks here. Just to kind of put that in your mind, we're going to cover telemetry detection later. But that's basically what a query looks like. And this is just kind of a quick kind of overview of what the event itself looks like. So the insight we're getting here is we can see Jason.Parry, regular domain user. The domain he's in is making this 4769 event. He's querying for the MS SQL service. And this is the IP he's coming from. And the ticket encryption type is 17, which is RC4, which is an IOC, which Matt will talk about shortly. And just the kind of end part of the query is the stats. So generally when you're looking for things like this in your environment, you're looking for irregularities. You want to see like what's going on, is there irregularities, and so you can kind of get the count of how many accounts are making these events. So basically we can use all that data to refine it, drill it down. If you're going to try and build a detection off of this, obviously you want to tune out as much noise as possible. So we're going to try and refine the query a bit. So we've got all our good stuff here. We're taking this event and we're taking and the encryption type 17, which is RC4. And then we're filtering out computer accounts. So we're only really interested in basically Active Directory domain user accounts making 4769s that have the ticket encryption type 17. And we can see here that that reveals one user in particular. Jason.Parry has made 82 of those, which is obviously non-standard behavior, might indicate a compromise. So we can now convert this into an alert and then have it monitor in real time in our environment. So to do that in Splunk, anytime you write a query, you can save that as an alert. So that's what we're just kind of doing here. We're saving a Kerberos 4769, a wee kind of description for the SOC team to look at, so they know what's happening or what it means when it fires. And we're going to do it in a threshold, so obviously we don't want to alert on every 4769 that happens in our environment because that would just be unmanageable. So we're going to do, obviously our environment's much smaller than would be enterprise, so we're just going to alert on if more than 3 of these happen in a 60-second period, we're going to generate a trigger alert, and that'll come up on our trigger alert dashboard as a high, and then that gives us something to action. You can do lots of cool stuff with Splunk in terms of its alerts and what it does, so you just kind of highlight this here. You can, like, for example, have it send an email to soc@company.com. That means you don't have to, sit and refresh your dashboard all the time. You can also do webhooks and things like that and integrate it into Slack. You can have like a Slack bot that's going to alert on certain things, or any alert you can have go to Slack for like criticals, for example. And then this is what it'll look like finally on your alert dashboard once you've kind of drilled down your alert, and hopefully you're not seeing too many of them. But that's kind of what the alert dashboard is going to populate like, and then you can go and view the results that have led to that alert firing off and kind of start doing a bit of an investigation into it.
Okay, so how does the red team keep the initiative? Because we'll talk about how the battle is kind of swinging between blue and red and in the cat and mouse. So on the endpoint, most competent red teams are now moving to C# implants or making use of C# tooling, because allegedly PowerShell is dead, except that actually we on the red side, we still find that PowerShell is good to go in many environments. To reduce the chance of detections on the endpoints, from whether that's from EDR or AV, if people are still running AV, we can sort of make use of like Rubius, which is basically a C# implementation of all the Kikyo functionality from Gentle Kiwi. It's made by part of the Ghost Pack from SpectreOps. And we can use SharpView, which is a C# implementation of all the functions from PowerView. So we often see again that there's 2012 R2 or plus, so maybe even 2016 or even 2019 if you're living dangerously, domain controllers. And you can carry on replacing domain controllers with, more up-to-date operating systems. But at some point, you do need to remember to actually update the domain functional level or the forest functional level of your domain. Because we often see that if you aren't raising the domain functional level, many of the protections granted by that increase aren't actually taking effect in your environment. So from 2008 plus, AES, rather than RC4, became the default for all Kerberos tickets. So that's quite handy from your side, on the blue, because you can obviously detect the usage of RC4 tickets, which should, in theory, never be flying around in your environment. That's where you'd alarm on 0x17. AES is 0x12. So from our side, again, we try and fit in, because a really good way that blue teams capture us is presence of the abnormal and absence of the normal. So if we start roasting from a incorrect user context, if we fished recruitment or something like that, or marketing, through a macro or HDR, whatever it happens to be, and then we start roasting across the entire domain, for MS SQL, it's quite unlikely in many organizations that that particular user in HR, marketing, or finance or something like that would actually be requesting those TGSs in normal sort of company operations. So we need to roast carefully against individual users, against individual service principal names from the right user context. And helpfully, Rubius has got all sorts of cool functionality that we'll go through in a second to help us pretend that we're in the right context even if we aren't. Again, this is quite important because I've been recommending honey spins to everybody that I've been speaking to for the past couple of years. More and more people are putting them in. So if we see a honey spin that looks suspicious, it's got almost an account name that says, just look at me, and then we discover it was created relatively recently, what we'll do is we'll try and pull as much information for that, whether that's the user or that service as we can. Then we'll go back to TI, because red teaming is an iterative cycle of the cyber kill chain. As soon as we get new information like that, we'll go back to the reconnaissance stage. So then we'll get the TI out or carry out additional threat intel, where we'll work out, if we are trying to roast a particular user, when did that user start at the organization? So for example, if we find somebody's LinkedIn, that's a good example, they'll often put their latest their latest jobs and such on there. And if the dates kind of correlate across to Active Directory, when their user accounts, etc., were created, it sort of helps calm us that it might not be a honey spin. Okay, so let's get some videos on the go. Okay, so what we've got up here is Posh C2, implants on the right, feedback on the left. We've got some fishes here as Jason Parry, and we can see that the domain functional level and the forest functional level reported as 7. So that's Server 2016, so we weren't lying when we said it's latest and greatest. What we're going to do is we use sharp view and just get the information on a particular user. So we're not going to try and roast all users across the domain at once. That's a very high threat, and we can use telemetry to detect that. And we'll see that we get different types of hashes returned depending on what that configuration is. So we've got this value here, and that changes. Excuse me. That changes. Oh no. Nightmare.
Job deposit.
Just pulling up. Yeah. And that changes depending on what that setting is. So if you are supporting AES 256 and 128, you'll get a different variation. What we can see here, though, is we're now roasting Bob Chicken. Okay, and we can see that we're receiving a type 18 hash. So that's AES for Bob Chicken, because the domain functional level is so high. We can see, though, when we roast him using this TGT deleg flag, what that does, it tells Rubius to use the current user's impersonation of Jason Parry to request a TGT from the domain controller, which is obviously configured for unconstrained delegation, because it's domain controller, and then it will use that user context to still obtain a type 23 hash. So although AES is enforced at the domain level, with the domain functional level, and on the account, we can still get TGS hashes for individual users. Obviously, again, on the blue side, you can detect that because you shouldn't really be seeing type 23 rather than type 18 requests. So type 23 is RC4, and type 18 is AES. Okay, let's move on slightly. Let's play that again. Okay, so that's the first attack, Kerberos, yeah? Pretty much carried out by many actors very frequently, but this is how we can do it to try and stay below the radar. So, unconstrained delegation. We're getting too much into Kerberos 101 again. We have a problem with Kerberos called the double hop problem, where we can't authenticate from here into there and then onwards to there. That would be 2 hops, yeah? 1 and 2. So we invented the concept of delegation. So this scenario here, we've got a user's workstation who wants to log into the web application, and the web application then speaks to the database server. But because we're a switched-on company, we don't want all of the actions taken on the database to be logged and recorded as the web server. We want to know, what Joe, Bob, and Alice are doing in the database. Yeah? So we allow the web server to impersonate and have permissions delegated to act on behalf of the user. Okay, so that's pretty much what unconstrained delegation is. I often see this where people make use of third-party Active Directory administrative tools. So if your admins aren't happy with, or you're using ADUC, Active Directory using computers, or you're using some form of Active Directory orchestration, maybe to tie into your HR system, like SuccessFactors, for example, is quite large, that you can have all sorts of automation off the back of that into your Active Directory, new user creation and things like that. That often is configured poorly with Delegation. And we also see it's quite frequently legacy Exchange environments have this, as well as every instance where a company has had BlackBerry services in the good old days while BlackBerry was still a thing. So to actually say from the blue side, how do I just very quickly check? Again, credit to Sean Metcalf down here. Saves me typing all this out. So if you just open a PS session from a domain user context, import the Active Directory commandlets, which again, all digitally signed, so you don't need any elevated permissions there, and run this query here, this will go across to your entire Active Directory and quickly tell you whether if this flag is true, that particular account is configured for unconstrained delegation. So unconstrained delegation means that you can impersonate any user to any service. So that's kind of the Kerberos equivalent of any. Yeah? And we'll get on to why that's a bad thing in a minute. If you see that this field is false, that means it's configured for constrained delegation. Either you've restricted the user context or you've restricted the service context. This is a side-by-side to say, hey, this is how you guys should be doing it. Use Kerberos only, and say we can only use this particular service or this computer. But note this says user or computer. Whereas on this side, this is sort of the YOLO approach, the any approach of we can delegate to any services, any user. Yeah, it's a bold architectural decision to be making. Okay, so let's do a little bit of an attack and actually taking this to giving us some additional accesses. The current scenario, because I'm conscious not everybody's familiar with the whole C2 concept, we have system access on a machine that is configured for unconstrained delegation. Yeah? And in this implementation, it's Windows Server 2016-S1. That's the host name. The aim for what we're doing here is to abuse the printer bug demoed by SpectreOps at DerbyCon last year. And what we do here is we coerce a domain controller with the print spooler running, and we look for printer updates, yeah, using MSRPC calls. What we do there is we then encourage the domain controller to authenticate to the server that we have unconstrained delegation on. Because we are system, we can then dump out TGTs, and in effect, we've now got the TGT, the ticket granting ticket, a large base 64 blob, of the domain controller computer account. Yeah, and that's obviously exceptionally powerful in an Active Directory environment. This has actually been patched. Microsoft have made a couple of changes now. So any new delegations and new forest boundaries, because we can jump across forest boundaries here, which is a new concept, is actually any new forest boundaries from this month, if you've applied this patch for this, won't support this. My personal prediction, having been an admin in an intercontinental organization before I joined the army, this is unlikely to be implemented that quickly, simply of the fear factor of breaking cross-realm authentication in a massive business. Massive businesses tend not to run that quickly in terms of change at the best of times. So, as we say, we can jump across forest boundaries. So since I've been doing computers, the domain has always been never been the security boundary, sorry. It's always been the forest. But now, as we'll see, we'll be going across forest boundaries. It's probably worth me saying that this is the first time this has ever been demoed in POSH C2. So thanks very much to Ben for getting this working, and thanks for R2B2 for the attempt. So what we've got here, we've got some shells on shell 103, yeah, which is Windows Server, and what we're doing, we're opening up a patched version of Rubius to work in POSH C2. We'll push this out soon. We're saying to Rubius, hey, just monitor every 3 seconds for when the Blore DC computer account authenticates to me. Now, we'll zip over to this shell, which is Jason Parry. He's a low-privileged user, and you'll note he is in a different forest. Yeah, there are forest trusts between the two, they're not domain. We'll now use a patched version of the spool sample, proof of concept from, I forget the gentleman's name, I think it's Lee Christensen or something. And we'll now entice the Blore domain controller to authenticate to us. And then using Rubius in monitor, we now extract it. So we can see we've got the computer account here of Blore's domain controller. So this is absolutely game on from the attacker side. At this point, you're probably getting close to rebuilding your forest. Okay, so we've got this base 64 blob. Now we need to do something with it. Okay, so again, pasting into Jason's low privilege user context, implant 104, we paste in that large base 64 ticket, and Rubius supplies it for us. Excellent. So this will apply to all implants or all logons that Jason currently has. Yeah. Now we can just approve that we have delegated access. We're now just going to DC sync, across from Digital Solutions, that Forest 1, across the forest boundary into Blore Bank, and DC sync the user Ben. For the purposes of this, Ben is an enterprise admin, but actually the fact that you have privileges to DC sync is indicative of you could DC sync anybody's NTLM password that you needed. Mimikatz helpfully takes quite a while to come back. Rather than you guys looking at a blank screen of Mimikatz for 35 seconds or so, just trust me, it comes back. Okay, so we've been working on this talk, for a fair old time now, and I think it's probably a fair assumption to say that detecting unconstrained delegation abuse is non-trivial. Ross is pretty good at this whole threat hunting thing, and as is SpectreOps, who invented the concept of it. We're still struggling to get really, really reliable at-scale detections, depending on the level of visibility you've got currently. However, we can do a little bit about it as admins, as the security community. If you cannot remove this functionality because you've got monstrous technical debt, that's okay, but I guarantee there's probably a very, very high chance you can reconfigure to use constrained delegation. So authenticate to particular services as particular users. We don't need the Kerberos equivalent of any. The other side we can do is actually force your vendors to act. Like, you control this, you're the buying community. If your vendors are saying, hey, we need unconstrained delegation to make our software work, get better software. Like, it genuinely is that simple. And we often see, again, the IT administrators, or service accounts, etc., they have higher privilege within the environment, but because security is inconvenient, we often find that they have less security controls, So like if you are doing tiered administrative accounts, we often find that elevated accounts that you use for workstation administration or server administration or domain administration, they're actually still permitted onto the internet through the proxy and through group policy and all that good stuff, rather than having all those privileges restricted. So if we are having to use these things, know that they are a greater attack surface, and because they have higher privileges, subject them to even more security than your normal users or your normal admin accounts. Depending on the visibility you've got in all of your forests, and we'll come on to that in a little bit more, you can actually monitor for this security event on the unconstrained server, but again, you're going to need really, really granular visibility at this point, and Ross will touch on that in a little bit. Ross, do you just want to quickly cover off that?
Yeah, so one thing you can do is monitor for SID filtering events, which is the 4675, and filter for this SID, which is Enterprise Domain Controller. So I'm just going to quickly show what that looks like here. So I guess, just to kind of add to what Max said, right, we love a challenge in the red team, who doesn't? So we wanted to try and look into the challenge of, you have one, domain digital solutions that's, all well configured, you've got really good visibility in it, but maybe you've got, a secondary domain in another country or whatever that's maybe not quite as secure that you don't have visibility into. It's not uncommon for us to see that. So when you're only seeing half the picture, how are you going to try and detect this? Turns out it's pretty difficult, to be honest. You really want to see everything on both sides, so that's why centralized logging and things like that are super important across all your forests. So just a quick run through here. We're looking for 4675, as I said, and we're looking for audit failures and the SID, and that gives us 44 events in the last 8 days. So it's quite a low amount, but the thing is, you just kind of need to basically monitor these. This might be normal traffic for your environment. If you've got a lot of kind of cross-forest authentication, stuff like that happening, it might not be. You can obviously use telemetry detection, so if you maybe only have one of these a week and then suddenly you get more, that could be an indicator. So that's kind of things you want to start looking at, really, and thinking about is what's normal for your environment, and then go from there. Another one you can do as well is look for just delegate. Well, it's kind of wildcarded there, but you're looking for basically events that correlate to delegation privileges. So you can, in Splunk, there's things called lookup files, and there's basically CSV files, and you can say only these accounts in this CSV should ever be able to do delegation. So you can then monitor for any accounts not on that list that are magically starting to do delegation or obtain the delegation privilege, and that might be an indicator of compromise. So that's something you can look at as well.
Okay, so from the red team side, if we've got access to this technique, we need to evade detection from Ross. We've said it is quite hard to do, but we need to assume that if we are making use of the technique, we will leave a footprint somewhere, and we need to operate on the assumption that the blue team will eventually start investigating us based on what we've just done. So it is tough to detect, but we say most of the detections comes from telemetry, understanding what normal looks like for your environment. And again, not a huge amount of organizations actually have an idea of what normal is. Certainly not at the layer 7, the sort of Active Directory layer. Most people are still struggling with what is normal IP comms in my environment at layer 3. So we use privileges that we've gained in a manner similar to this to diversify, and I'll just touch on what diversification or removing attribution is. So as the red team, we can control quite a lot of variables, whether that are the things that are on the next slide. Yeah, so we control these a lot. Here's just a small subset of the variables we control. At any time that we do something that we're concerned will generate a significant footprint or potentially lead to a detection and then a response, we need to diversify as many of these as possible, whether that's the C2 URLs that we're using. Obviously we're making use of domain fronting across the CDNs. We are not going direct to individual domains. And if we are using fronting providers, like a content delivery network like CloudFront, Azure, Akamai, Fastly, or Alibaba, we need to diversify those because it's very easy for an organization to detect a small indicator of compromise that uses, say, CloudFront, and then just quickly grep through their proxy logs, assuming they've got them, for all connections directly to CloudFront. Execution method, whether that is, using run.dll or running an exe or whatever it happens to be. There is a big feeling in the security community that we always need to remain entirely in memory and never touch disk. We routinely touch disk where appropriate, and I would say that our objective achievement rates are still pretty damn good. A good example here is the lateral movement method. So, for example, if WMI is the norm in the environment, we'll use WMI to move from one block to the other. If we're using DCOM and we're not using MMC20 to move left and right across the network because it's very loud, we're using a DCOM method. We'll maybe move to WMI, or if your PSExec is used by the admins, we'll use PSExec. So it's all about diversification to remove as many tells between attack chain and access chain 1 and attack chain access chain 2. So if we are dropping files to disk, we're putting them in, ctemp, or we're going to maybe move to app data, or we might move to startup, or we'll move to a different location. And again, if we make the decision to use a golden ticket as a result of the unconstrained delegation, I would caveat that with, we'll go through the safety considerations for golden ticket generation in a moment. We know that no large organization, i.e. someone who's mature enough to be doing red teaming, is that they're not going to rotate the KRB TGT password, the God mode of Kerberos password, with the double tap very fast at all, because it will break an awful lot of things across the environment. So we know that our OODA loop, which is the ability for the red team to observe the situation, orientate themselves to the situation, make a decision, and then act, it spins very quickly because we are on the phone or in the same room as each other. Whereas I know that the blue team's OODA loop is distinctly slower because you have change management or you have poor appetite for risk and such, and poor appetite for lack of availability of services.
Yeah, just another note on the detection side of things as well. One of the problems, or benefits, I guess, of things like PORC2 is we're able to use assembly load to load binaries into memory and run them. So a typical detection might be looking for rubius.exe being dropped to disk, or the spool sample being dropped to disk and ran, or maybe the file hash of those binaries. Obviously that's not going to get detected when you're doing things in memory. So that's just something to be aware of as well. One other thing is network connections to IPC dollar in your DCs. But again, the problem there is cross-forest. If you don't have full visibility on both sides, you're not necessarily going to be able to see that.
Okay, so that's the second attack that we've covered off. Let's talk about the third one, the golden ticket. So a bit of a TLDR on what a golden ticket is. It's a ticket that you create into which you grant yourself group memberships or privileges, etc. And then it is signed with the NTLM hash of KRB TGT. And if you don't sign your ticket, whatever service you authenticate to, it will know that it isn't from the KDC, Key Distribution Center, and thus will not allow you access to that service. I need to caveat that with my personal opinion that this is an extremely risky attack. We're here to be doing, red teaming is here to reduce risks in organizations. What we are doing here is, in effect, granting somebody the ultimate keys to the castle. Netitude have been doing sort of threat-led red teaming for 5 years. I'd say, getting to our objectives is exceptional. We've never had to do it. But I'm aware that many red teams sort of consider it like standard operating procedure. Just in case they do get kicked out, they can just elevate their access from a single fish again. But we'll go through a couple of safety caveats as well. So what we're going to do here is, at this point, we've popped the domain and we are domain admin. It's not certain that we actually need to pop domains to achieve our objectives on the red team. The domain is quite rarely the objective. It's usually a critical economic function or something similar. So here we can just see we've got an account of MJ hashes. So he's got no special group memberships, no privileges, no skills. So he's largely irrelevant to us. But what we can do is we can submit a golden ticket, as we do here, using Mimikatz in PSV2, or we can use tools in C# to do similar. We submit this golden ticket into MJ Hash's current session. And what we're giving him here is elevated rights. We're giving him ID 500, adding in additional SIDs. We can see here, and additional group membership, sorry. So we can see that this golden ticket is successfully submitted. What we've made here is MJ Hashes is, for all intents and purposes, enterprise admin. What we'll do now, just to prove that he has actually got elevated permissions, is we'll use Mimikatz just to DC sync again, just as a proof of concept that he now does have those elevated permissions. On the Mimikatz ticket we did submit, there's these flags here, start, offset, end, and the lifetime of the ticket. So by default, Mimikatz will change lots of these to 10 years. Exceptionally loud, exceptionally risky. So we're making MJ Hash's enterprise admin for up to 10 years, as long as his current logon session and his Kerberos tickets aren't purged. Quite dangerous. So we can mitigate that risk if we did have to use that by making the ticket valid for 10 minutes or something like that. But obviously then the blue team could detect on the length of a Kerberos ticket not being 10 hours, the default Active Directory. So whilst looking for golden tickets in your environment that aren't 10 hours, you see them being smaller, that might be a good way of catching an ethical red team. But obviously people are trying to reduce the risk for you. But actually in terms of catching like actual malicious actors, they'll just make use of 10 hours. Or 10 years, sorry. Okay, so on the detection side, before we get into the Splunk, so DCs only check the validity of all the information within that ticket once it's 20 minutes old. So you could actually, in theory, submit a golden ticket and in the user field do /meme team, and that would absolutely work across the environment for the first 20 minutes. Clearly, sort of ethical security testers or grown-up red teamers will not do this. So we can also look a little bit further into the Kerberos activity. In the tickets that you're submitting into and then collecting in your Active Directory logs, because we're all doing Active Directory logs, right? We'll see the net BIOS name instead of the FQDN in the domain field. Except that, again, grown-up red teamers will ensure that we type in the FQDN. If the attacker misses the /domain flag and then the rest of the FQDN, Mimikatz tries to help you out by putting the net BIOS name in, except you can then alert off that, because there's no real reason for net BIOS names, as far as I know, happy to be corrected, for the FQDN to not be there. And again, we can examine the encryption types at every level. Should never really be seeing RC4 if we are in a mature environment that's moved with the times. We can also use time-based analysis to use to see TGT submissions, ticket granting ticket submissions with no TGS for those services immediately before. But again, grown-up red teams will make use of tooling to request TGSs for services just before we use a TDT to access them. And indeed, we can look for event 4762, which is an admin logon or an elevated permissions, and they'll have a blank domain field inside that ticket when you log it in Active Directory.
Yeah. So what happens if it's not APT meme team that's targeting you and it's a competent red team that have filled out all these fields, made it much harder to detect? You can't just, detect on blank fields in an event. Well, that's not so bad, because we believe, reliably detect that with a query that looks broadly similar to this. So again, we're indexing to main because we have no fear. We're looking at events in the last 7 days. Windows event log, ideally you'd probably put that to security, because it's security event logs, but we're doing star here. And we're looking for account names that are not administrator or computer accounts, but suspiciously have a SID or RID of 500. As we all know, that's local admin. So why would a domain user account, for example, have that? They wouldn't, basically, is the short answer. And then we're just going to filter on some stats here. So account names, as we can see, MJ Hashes is causing a lot of trouble here. With multiple different events that meet these requirements. So one of particular note is Captain Koala, so we're just going to quickly touch on a bit of kind of threat hunting here. So we've seen MJ Hashes is running wild with a golden ticket in our environment. We kind of want to understand what he's doing. So we're looking at a 4738 event, which is like an account was changed or something's modified that object. And we can see here, MJ Hashes is the culprit. He's got his SID 500 or RID 500 here. And he's making changes to the target account of Captain Koala. And another thing to note here is all of these being a dash, according to Microsoft documentation, means that it's ACL changes on that object. So he's probably making some backdoors or something to Captain Koala. So now that we've kind of understood the account that has the ticket, that they're running wild in the backdoor on accounts, we want to kind of start looking at, okay, how widespread is this in our environment? So we can just kind of slightly modify our query to do a table and just look for our account name, which is going to give us the account name responsible and then the target name. And as we can see, MJ Hashes has been modifying lots of objects in our environment, and that was absolutely not a result of Mac fat fingering a command. Just, be aware.
Okay, so the detection side is actually relatively reliable. Okay, but what we can do, is again on the evasion, is request a TGT or a TGS for the service from the account you're about to apply your ticket into, using Rubius. Again, hats off to Spectrops for giving us those toolings. We can make use of the domain offset and lifetime flags, again, like competence and risk reduction, because otherwise the Mimikatz defaults are very long, and indeed they use the NetBIOS name. Okay, and also we see this routinely. Many organizations have a script or something similar that will check for new additions to domain admins, and then we'll email them if they see additional members of the group. It's rather retro, if you ask me, monitoring for membership of domain admins. I think there's many other ways, such as the permission to do these, the 3 GUIDs required for, the 2, sometimes 3 GUIDs required to do get NCC changes function using directory replication services. That's what's happening under the hood when we do a DC sync attack. Those 3 GUIDs I'll put on our GitHub, and we'll give you a link to that at the end. Just simply so you can just immediately audit for any instances of those particular GUIDs having ACLs changed. Okay, so let's have a little look at this being done. We can see how actually those GUIDs are amended. So again, just as a top tip here, C# implant, certainly in Posh 2, is case sensitive. So if you were to miss off -sam account name in caps, you would actually dump out it would just basically be net user stuff. So we can see here that Captain Koala currently doesn't have any elevated privileges. But if we submit a golden ticket from MJ Hashes, we can then use the MJ Hashes account to make changes to Captain Koala. And then we can prove that Captain Koala has those elevated privileges, again, just by proving he's got DC sync privs. Here is a sharp view command that will do it for you. And all that sharp view is a re-implementation in C# of the awesome PowerView tooling. Okay, so that ticket's come back. Helpfully, Mimikatz takes quite a while to submit these things. It's all very boring in a demo, isn't it, to look at screens not doing anything. So here we should be able to see that the tooling comes back and we see some ACLs modified. Okay, so now we're in implant 116, which is Captain Koala. We've just proved that he didn't have elevated permissions until we use SharpView to grant him them. And now we'll prove that Captain Koala can dump out the digitalsolutions.com NTLM hash for Bob Chicken. Posh 2 did have a small headache at this point. Gave us all sorts of errors, including killing our shells, but hopefully it came back. Not entirely sure what that was. There we are. It comes back. You see me frantically F5ing the implant list, hoping we've not been kicked out by the invisible blue team. But as it was just the connect the internet here had dropped. Okay, and we can see now that Captain Koala has the DC sync privs. So he is in effect domain admin, enterprise admin, or whatever. Next.
So moving on to threat hunting demo. Basically, so we're going to look at like what happens when you get one of these detections, and we're just going to run through a kind of quick win scenario that you can do to really determine if what's appeared in your event or alert dashboard is actually a compromise, or if it's nothing to worry about, and maybe you need to look at refining your alerts again. So just because everybody loves Kerberos, we're going to look at what happens with one of these 4769 events. We're going to view the results of that, which you can see here, and we can see that the reason that the event is fired, or the alert is fired, sorry, is that Jason has triggered 15 of the events matching this criteria in the last 60 seconds. Pretty weird behavior, if you ask me. So just a kind of quick look at like what happens when you view results. You get your 15 events here, and then you want to dig into these events and see what's going on. So the key details here are you've got your account name, obviously as we know is Jason. The service name is MS SQL, and the client IP is what we're going to look at in a minute, and then the ticket encryption type. So yeah, it ticks all the boxes for our IOCs. So now we're going to go and interrogate the host to see if actually a compromise has occurred on that. Maybe something's broken and is just going wild. We don't know yet. So we're going to look here, and as we can see, well actually, sorry, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for indicators of compromise out with this. So we're going to look at, is there C2 traffic? Because unless Jason Parry's been remotely Kerberosed, we're probably going to see some C2 beacons coming out of this host. And as we can see here, we have quite a lot of traffic going to this IP, which would be an indicator of beacon traffic going out. And again, just for anyone not familiar with like C2 comms, generally happens over a period of time with beacons, so they could be on 30-second beacons, and that'll talk back to the command server every 30 seconds. Obviously, over a period of time, we're going to start to build up that sort of that traffic there. So now we're in a much worse place from an organization perspective, because we've had an alert fire off, we've looked into it, and now we have confirmed that, or likely confirmed that actually somebody's been phished potentially, and an attacker is in our environment. And this is just kind of what EventCode 3 looks like. So this is a Sysmon event. So just a note, you won't get a netcon insight with regular win events. They don't have that capability, which is why we need Sysmon. So that's what EventCode 3 is. It's network detections, or network connections rather. So as we can see, we have PowerShell.exe going out to the internet here from this IP. The user's Jason, it's on 4443, and that's the host name. So these are all things we can now start to do additional threat hunting on. If the red team's diversified their kind of attack chain, it might be harder, but maybe they're not, and they're just, running wild with PowerShell.exe out to the internet. That's something we can look for. So now we've found one compromised host in our environment. We want to try and find if there's any other instances, if this is much more widespread and chaotic than just one host or one user that's clicked on an email. So we're going to look in our environment for any hosts that have been connecting to that IP that we believe to be the C2 IP in the last 7 days. So that's what we're doing here. And you can see that the source type is Sysmon, as I was talking about earlier. And we can see here we've found 3 additional hosts, which now means, oh no, we'll get a widespread breach, not just one user. So another thing I wanted to add in here was just DNS Insight. This is a new thing for Sysmon. They recently added that, I think it's like a month or 2 ago, the ability to kind of get visibility into DNS events. So that's what we're doing here. We're looking at EventCode 22, which is DNS, which reveals a 4th host. Kind of the reason this is important is just for complications in our environment and reasons we weren't able to consume proxy logs. So obviously if all your hosts are configured to go out a proxy, you'd have to do this at the proxy level, not at the host level. But it's also just kind of important to understand that if you have hosts that go straight out to the internet, then you would need to do this one as well. So what does a DNS event look like? Broadly similar to the netcon event. We've got the query that it's looking up, it's resolved IP, again the process making the connection, the process ID. So again, these are all things we can kind of hunt off the back of. And just a kind of quick 2-for-1 query. We will be putting all these queries on GitHub, so for anyone that wants to go and, throw these into alerts or have a play with them, and whatever login tool they have, they can do that, or even test them out in an environment. So all this query is going to do is cover both event 22 and 3, and then we just get it all in one nice query instead of having to do 2 queries. So one thing, there's loads of different types of things you can do with threat hunting off the back of detections. So one of those is like, if you've identified the process such as PowerShell, you can look for like PowerShell making network connections throughout your environment. You can look for processes connecting to the internet that shouldn't be. So basically anything like non-browser based probably shouldn't be making external netcons, especially on 88443. And Notepad.exe probably shouldn't be doing DNS lookups. That's probably a big IOC in itself. You can obviously look for file names, file hashes, as we discussed earlier with the Rubius and spool sample and things, but that's not always going to be a reliable way of finding things. Another good one is unsigned binaries as well. So unsigned binaries going out to the internet, or binaries that should be signed that aren't. So if you've got Outlook.exe going out to the internet and it's unsigned, that's probably an indicator that, the red team's tried to be smart and cover their tracks by having Outlook.exe, but actually it's an unsigned binary, or maybe they've backdoored a signed binary that's then made it unsigned. Another really powerful one as well is never before seen domains. So if you see a breach, you can go and look for like never before seen domains in the last 24 hours, or you can just in real time look for never before seen domains. That can be noisy as well. So it's again just something to be aware of. And you can use lookup files as well for this. So if you want to ignore certain things, you can do that. And then, as we kind of touched on earlier, telemetry-based detection. So WMI's example, you might use WMI on a daily basis in your environment. So maybe, give or take 100 WMI events is normal for your environment, and then one day or in a 1 hour period suddenly see 250 WMI events fire off, that's probably an indicator of compromise. Maybe the red team think they're being smart, blending in, but actually they've offset or went out with what is normal for your environment. So that's where understanding your environment becomes really important. We did try to, or we were going to demo most of these, but unfortunately time constraints meant we couldn't, so I'm just going to quickly go through processes going at making netcons. So again, just kind of back to this. So we're going to look for like PowerShell.exe in our environment, making network connections. And that's kind of what we get here. So we're looking for any of these events, and we're filtering on computer name, event code, and image, which is the process, because maybe they're not just using PowerShell.exe. As you can see, we get netsh going out, svc host going out as well. So that maybe gives us an idea of the typical things they're using in our environment, so we can then go and look for them. So this is now where those processes are going. So we know these processes are making network connections. We now want to see if any are going to the C2 IP. And that's what we're doing here. As we can see, we've got quite a lot of PowerShell ones going out here. And yeah, that's just like something you can do, in effect, once you see a detection to try and understand what's going out. If you see other IPs that are maybe suspicious, or if you're doing it on a URL basis, you can obviously look for them as well.
Okay, so we've covered quite a lot of ground here. I'm just conscious that if everyone's like struggled to make notes and stuff, the slides are already on our GitHub. So if you've got limited time with you, so that's limited like resources and sort of personnel or money or time or just a slow-moving organization, we really feel on our side of the house, on the red side, that AD logging isn't really being done particularly well at scale. It's okay, as we saw in our lab here. You know, we've got a couple of machines, you know, and it's much easier to do. But actually, Active Directory logging, the total cost to deploy Sysmon is probably about 15 minutes. You know, it gives you a phenomenal amount of visibility that probably rivals EDR. Talking about EDR, obviously the sales guys will tell you that EDR is the silver bullet that will entirely move the battle space in Blue's favor. Every competent red team in the UK and overseas has bypasses for all of the EDR products that people invest time and money into. And if not, we have copies ourselves, so we can work out exactly what an alert in Silence does, but it might get past Carbon Black and things like that. So, again, Active Directory, and this age of single sign-on, people are using Okta or Active Directory Federated Services with SAML claims across organizations and things like that. Your Active Directory is now the attack surface, and indeed it has been for a while. The idea that hackers or APTs or red teams are firing exploits down SOX chains in Cobalt Strike is just not happening. It's all about Active Directory and legacy problems, and people having a grip on what normal looks like in their Active Directory environment. You need to know what normal does look like. Yeah? You should be collecting these logs already from a guarantee of availability services. If your admins or your NOC are not collecting logs from your servers or your workstations at this point, just get new admins, because this is kind of like pretty much systems administration 101. So proactively, we should be monitoring these things rather than trying to go back in time and do these things reactively. No, you do need to invest in to get some visibility. Granted, Splunk is definitely not free if you use it just as a scene, but there's plenty of alternatives. From some form of Elasticsearch, Logstash and Kibana stack, or whatever it needs to be, or you can even go like Logarithm or whatever works. There's plenty of free options. You don't have to use Splunk. We just use Splunk here because we were able to get a 60 or 90-day dev license for just the sake of sending them an email. So there's lots of free tooling here. This isn't it's going to cost us a huge amount. Storage, it's 2019. Even enterprise class storage is still pretty cheap when you look at the alternatives. Saving 50 grand on a SAN or whatever, but then suffering multi-million pounds worth of breaches is obviously not a good thing. Just ask Marriott. Or BA, who knows? Take your pick. Just like to say thank you very much to these guys here. For giving us the time to do this, and to everyone I've worked with now, or people I've worked with previously. I'd know her even less if I hadn't been under your tutelage, so thanks very much. Anyone got any questions? I confess that I'm not like an awesome blue teamer in any way, so I may have said something wrong, and that's absolutely fine.
curiosity, the Splunk and logging question. I've got first-hand experience with an organisation that believes Splunk's the answer to the logging. So rather than having independent logging, everything gets chunked into Splunk, and they think that that's a logging solution. What would be your countermeasure, or what would be your argument against that? I think it's stupid, but it's very difficult for me to turn around an organisation that believes in just pissing away the money to Splunk rather than logging.
Yeah, because Splunk's pricing is like non-trivial, to say the least. It's, if you just use Splunk as a SIEM for your organisation, it's yeah. Number one, it wasn't designed as a SIEM. It's a data platform. So I went over to Splunk HQ and did like a 3-hour workshop on like Splunk 101. And they use some really good case studies that if your organization uses Splunk for everything already, you can actually get some really good, valuable information and insights that aren't related to security out of it. Splunk's exceptionally powerful. And I think one of the reasons it is so powerful is, like, let's face it, all the big boys use it. So all of the large, successful tier 0, tier 1 financial organizations, healthcare providers and stuff, they're starting to come across to Splunk. And because of that, there's a big, massive blue team threat hunting ecosystem around it. On the Splunk App Store almost, with loads of pre-built stuff.
I think the difference there with larger organisations is that they'll capture logs, as well as throwing it to Splunk. As like this particular organisation, their Fusion believes that Splunk is the be-all and end-all, so there's no filtering, there's no capture, it just all goes to Splunk with the hope that something will stick and make it happy. That's, say, large organisations log and forward to Splunk and use Splunk effectively as a result of that, because they're aggregating logs into Splunk rather than just Splunk and hoping something will stick.
Yeah, because Splunk's priced on like a per gig or per terabyte basis, I believe. You should like filter before you put it in Splunk, unless, your sort of like credit card like has many digits that all are nines.
Also, like Splunk is only as good as the logs you're sending into it. It's, by default, the Splunk forwarders are only going to send win event logs and AD logs in. So like, if you're not putting Sysmon on there, you're really limiting yourself in what you can see. It can ingest other tools as well. So just Splunk on its own is probably not really going to do what you want it to do. You want to have additional tooling on top of that on your endpoints that then you consume it all into Splunk, and then you kind of go from there. But if you're not doing that, then it's kind of, just to capture win event logs is probably not really sensible, to be honest.
Unless you've got a deal, because I know Splunk do have this ability where you just pay them a flat fee, and they just give you like a data ingestion limit of star. Then you don't need to worry about the pricing. But that's the exception.
Should say as well, we're going to put all the queries, the slides, videos, etc. here. So as I said earlier, if anyone wants to go and have a play with the queries or go back over the slide or whatever, slides, whatever, they can do that. That's our Twitter handles as well.
Yeah. Just I forgot to mention the code to do honey spins is up there. Really simple, I forgot to mention this. A honey spin, it's a service principal name that you register for an account that doesn't exist in Active Directory. So there's 2 chances to catch this. You register a spin, or service principal name, for an account that doesn't exist. When a low-tier attacker or an APT meme team arrive, they'll Kerberos the domain instantly. Yeah? But you know that because that service or that user account and that service principal name doesn't actually provide services, under normal network ops, there would be no need for actually any requests for that particular TGS to ever be made, because nothing actually legitimately talks to it, because it points to nothing. So that's chance 1 to catch it. As soon as a TGS for honey account, is requested, you're being Kerberosted because there's no need and there's no functionality that would ever lead for those to be requested. Additionally, then you give it a trivial password, and then an attacker will pipe it into his hashcat root thing and pop the account and gain access to the plain text password. And then they will use that account to then try and authenticate across the domain, and that is then the second chance to try and capture it. So when it's TGS requested, or when your honey account is then actively used to attempt to authenticate into the services. So there's 2 chances to create a honey spin, to catch usage of a honey spin. There's 4 different ways of doing it. All are trivially simple, but there's loads of copy pastas for you in defensive scripts, just simply because it's so easy to do, and it's like kind of shifts the battlefield back to the blue team. Red team has been going wild for like past sort of 3-5 years or something. Blue teams, you understand the network better than us. We are doing keyhole surgery down C2 from the, potentially from the other side of the planet. You guys are all working in those environments. You know the constraints, and you know where the critical economic functions or the important data is. Try and take the initiative back. Make use of honey spins. Maybe some technologies like Elusive, where they drop honey creds into memory and all that good stuff. Try and protect what you care about and put the little metaphorical minefields around those, rather than trying to detect and defend across all the things at all the time, particularly if you are struggling with scale or log ingestion problems.
I would add as well that like visibility is only one thing, or it's only one step. Like just being able to see things isn't going to, you know, protect your organization. You have to be able to detect, contain, eradicate, and remediate. And if you can't do that, then, you know, all you're going to do is watch attackers run wild in your network rather than actually get them out. So just be mindful of that as well.
Just one last thing, if you do have forest trusts and stuff, and you've got like a follow the sun capability in your blue team side, we'll often roast across forest boundaries or international boundaries, because we know that there are organizational or cultural or language problems in between different countries and different SOC teams. You know, and the SOC that's here in the UK might be amazing, so we'll try and roast across a trust into where the SOC isn't as skilled, because we know that it'll take longer for them to react, and then they won't want to talk to the SOC over here because of cultural problems. So we abuse the people and the process as well as technology.
Good to go.
I think we're all good, yeah?